Have you ever felt like you're doing absolutely everything right?
Like you're checking every single box.
Exactly. You're setting your goals, you're reading all the right material, putting in the effort day after day, waking up early, organizing your schedule, doing the affirmations.
But then something just stalls out.
Yes. You just keep hitting this invisible wall. It's like there's a glass ceiling on your progress. And you have to wonder, why do we so often sabotage our own success or our physical health or our most cherished relationships just as things are finally starting to go well?
It's a incredibly common pattern.
Right. Like you finally get the promotion and suddenly you feel this overwhelming urge to quit. Or you finally meet someone who treats you with genuine respect and you catch yourself picking fights over absolutely nothing.
And that can feel incredibly frustrating.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
Because today's deep dive is an absolute paradigm shifter. We've gathered a stack of incredible source material research on neurobiology, clinical psychology, epigenetics, and our mission today is to decode the hidden architecture of your subconscious mind.
We really want to get to the root of it.
We're going to uncover the invisible blueprints, the biological filters, and the secret family loyalties that keep you stuck in a loop of familiar pain. And most importantly, we're going to talk about exactly how you can systematically rewire this underlying programming. Joining me today is our resident expert who's going to help us understand the biology behind why we do the things we do.
It's great to be here for this deep dive. What's fascinating here is that what feels to you, the listener, like a lack of willpower, or perhaps a deep, unfixable character flaw, is actually a highly efficient biological survival system doing exactly what it was programmed to do.
So we're basically being too hard on ourselves.
Very much so. We tend to judge ourselves so harshly when we fail to meet our conscious goals. But our biology doesn't necessarily want us to be happy. It wants us to be safe. And to the primitive, ancient areas of the human brain, safe simply means familiar.
Even if that familiarity is terrible.
Exactly. Even if it's deeply painful. If you survived a chaotic environment yesterday, your brain assumes that recreating that exact same chaos today is the best statistical strategy for surviving tomorrow.
That is just such a profound shift in perspective. I mean, we walk around thinking we're making conscious, logical choices about our lives, but really, we're operating off a hidden script. And the source material introduces this concept that I want to dive into right away. It's called the internal record.
Yes, the internal record is foundational to understanding this.
When I first read about this, I pictured like a dusty diary sitting on a shelf somewhere in the back of my brain. But it's not passive at all, is it? It's more like an active oscillatory radio frequency.
That's a great way to describe it.
You're constantly broadcasting a signal to the world around you. If your internal radio is tuned to a frequency of, say, inadequacy, it magnetically attracts external experiences that match that exact frequency. We're talking about restrictive financial limits, misleading partners, toxic bosses.
Because your brain is actively searching for that match.
Right. It's as if your brain is literally seeking out evidence in your environment to prove your internal record right.
Yes, the radio analogy is incredibly apt. And we need to emphasize that this isn't just a psychological metaphor. This is measurable, hard neurobiology. Advanced electroencephalography EEG shows that the brain maintains a high-fidelity dossier of our decisions, our beliefs, and our expectations.
And it updates constantly, right?
It tracks this internal record with sampling rates as high as 500 hertz.
Wait, 500 hertz? You mean 500 times a second?
Exactly. 500 times every single second, your brain is checking your external environment and comparing it against your internal record to see if they match. Let's look at the mechanics of this, specifically involving the basal ganglia and the prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex being the newer part of the brain.
Right, it's the evolutionary newcomer. It maintains your conscious, goal-directed sequences. This is the party that says, I want to save money or I want to be in a healthy relationship.
But the basal ganglia has other plans.
Underneath that conscious desire is the basal ganglia, an older structure that normalizes signals and enhances contrast based on what it expects to see. If your subconscious goal, your deeply held internal record, is set to inadequacy, these brain regions will coordinate to actually filter out evidence of your success.
That is wild.
They prioritize signals of lack and failure because the system's primary directive is to maintain the integrity of that established record.
So let me get this straight. If I fundamentally believe I'm a failure, my brain will literally ignore a room full of applause and intensely focus on the one person in the back who is yawning, just to prove I was right all along.
That is exactly what happens.
It's actively filtering my reality. And what blew my mind in the research is that this doesn't just happen to individuals. It happens on a macro level, too. When we look at large organizations, we see this exact same dynamic playing out, which researchers call organizational inadequacy.
That is a brilliant connection to make. The individual biology scales up to the organizational level perfectly.
I mean, take law enforcement agencies, for example. The research shows that when an agency has an inadequate internal record, meaning their systemic self-belief or internal operational standards are corrupted, it leads to physical systemic decay.
You see it in their daily operations.
Yeah, you get specialized units operating completely rogue without actual missions, or daily reports that completely contradict what's on the body-worn camera footage. Or look at massive engineering firms. If the internal record of compliance is inadequate, it's not just the paperwork that suffers.
The physical structures themselves begin to fail.
Right. The physical HVAC systems they build actually fail because the system subconsciously triggers a mandatory finding of non-compliance. It's a macro-level manifestation of victim consciousness. The system falls apart because the internal record is corrupted, almost like the organization itself is self-sabotaging.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, whether it's an HVAC system in a skyscraper or a human nervous system in a living room, when the internal record is deficient, the external reality simply cannot achieve balance or flow.
It just forces a crisis.
Exactly. The system will create a crisis to validate its internal state of deficiency. And for the individual, we have to ask, who originally wrote this internal record? Clinical frameworks suggest it is often written for a secret audience.
The secret audience? This concept is wild. Can you break down what that means for us?
Certainly. The secret audience is the concept that our behavior, even decades into adulthood, is frequently a subconscious performance for an internalized caregiver from our formative years.
So we're essentially putting on a play for ghosts.
We carry the ghosts of our past observers in our minds. Maybe it was a highly critical father or an emotionally unavailable mother. Even if that person is no longer in our lives or has passed away, our actions are unconsciously designed to either desperately appease them or vehemently rebel against them.
Yes, we create this false self to appease that secret audience. We're so terrified of the deeper pain of external rejection of the world looking at us and saying, you aren't good enough, that we develop an inner tyrant to beat them to the punch.
It's a preemptive strike.
Exactly. This inner tyrant preemptively attacks us with vicious self-criticism. It's as if we become both the protagonist and the director of our own great play. And what we do is we end up casting real-life people, our spouses, our bosses, our friends, as minor characters whose only job is to fulfill these old, tragic scripts we wrote when we were kids.
We project those roles onto them.
We provoke our spouse into yelling at us just so we can feel the familiar sting of the critical parent.
That inner tyrant uses self-criticism as a biological shield. It reasons that if it punishes you first, the external world's rejection won't hurt as much because you've already inflicted the maximum damage on yourself.
It's sad, but it makes sense biologically.
It is a brilliant, albeit tragic, protective mechanism. But to really grasp how powerful this is, we need to shift from the psychological realm to the cellular realm. We need to understand how this script actually gets downloaded into our biology in the first place.
And this brings us to epigenetics, which completely shatters how most of us were taught biology in high school.
Exactly. For a very long time, the central dogma of biology was genetic determinism. This is the idea that your DNA is your absolute destiny.
Like, if it's in your genes, you're doomed.
Right. If your parents had anxiety, you will have anxiety. If your family has a history of heart disease, you're a ticking time bomb. The nucleus of the cell, which holds the DNA, was considered the brain of the cell. But the field of epigenetics has completely flipped this understanding.
It's not the nucleus at all.
No, it's not. We now know that the cell membrane, the outer skin of the cell, is the true brain. The membrane is covered in receptors that process environmental signals.
So it's taking in everything around us.
It translates your perceptions, your emotions, and your thoughts into actual blood chemistry. That blood chemistry then travels to the nucleus and tells the DNA how to express itself, which genes to turn on and which to turn off.
I absolutely love the blueprint analogy for this because it makes it so clear. Imagine your genes are just blueprints sitting on an empty dirt lot. Blueprints don't do anything on their own. They can't build a house. They just sit there.
They require action.
They need a builder to come along, pick them up, and read them. In this scenario, your mind is that builder. Your mind chooses which genetic blueprints to read and build based entirely on how you perceive your environment.
Spot on.
If you perceive threat, inadequacy, and fear, your builder starts constructing stress responses, inflammatory pathways, and disease. But if you perceive safety and growth, the builder reads entirely different blueprints.
That is precisely how it works. The DNA does not control the outcome. The perception of the environment controls the DNA. But the critical question is, when does this builder learn how to read the blueprints? How does it decide what constitutes a threat and what constitutes safety?
That happens when we're kids, right? Like really young kids.
Yes. From the third trimester of pregnancy up until about age 7, the human brain operates primarily in a theta brainwave state. Theta is a low frequency, roughly 4 to 8 hertz.
What does that feel like for an adult?
For an adult, theta is the state you're in right before you fall asleep, or when you are in deep hypnosis. It's a hypnagogic, highly suggestible state. A child in this phase is not analyzing the world. They are essentially a biological video recorder in record mode.
Just downloading everything.
You are downloading the behaviors, the fears, the financial anxieties, and the relational limitations of your caregivers without any critical filter.
Because you literally don't have the hardware yet to filter it out.
Correct. The prefrontal cortex, which handles critical thinking and logic, is not fully online. So a 4-year-old doesn't have the conscious capacity to observe a stressed mother and say, my mother is experiencing financial anxiety due to macroeconomic factors, but that has nothing to do with my inherent worth.
Right. A kid can't logic their way out of that feeling.
The child simply absorbs the visceral feeling of anxiety and lack as the absolute reality of the world. It becomes their baseline code.
And here is a statistic from the source material that is just staggering for you to hear. By the time you reach age 35, 95% to 99% of your daily thoughts and behaviors are running on these subconscious programs. Just think about that.
It's an overwhelming majority of our mental activity.
Out of the 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts you have every single day, 98% of them are exact repeats from yesterday. And roughly 80% of those repeat thoughts are negative. You are walking around as a fully grown adult trying to build a career and a marriage, but you're running highly efficient, completely invisible software that was coded by a 7-year-old observing stressed out adults.
It is a sobering realization, and this raises an important question. How does this deeply embedded software organize itself within our psyche? Clinical models, particularly systemic models of the psyche, show that the mind is not a single, unified monolith.
We're not just one cohesive personality.
The mind is actually multiple. It operates as like a complex system of parts, much like a family or a corporation.
I think this is where so many of us feel crazy. We feel like we have competing voices in our heads. Like, I want to eat healthy, but another voice says, eat the whole pizza. How do these parts work?
The clinical framework categorizes these parts into 3 main roles. First, we have exiles.
Exiles.
Exiles are the young, highly sensitive, traumatized parts of ourselves. They hold the deep shame, the terror, and the feelings of unworthiness from those early theta state years. Because the pain carried by the exiles is so overwhelming, the system cannot function if they are constantly active.
It would just be too much to handle day to day.
So to protect those exiles from ever feeling that pain again, and to protect the system from collapsing, the mind develops managers.
Managers. These are the proactive parts, right?
Yeah.
The ones trying to control everything so the pain never gets triggered in the first place.
Exactly. Managers are proactive protectors. They use strategies like intense perfectionism, workaholism, people-pleasing, or even the strategy of staying small and invisible to keep the exiles safely hidden in the basement of the psyche.
They just want to keep the peace.
They manage your daily life to ensure you never face rejection or failure. But life is unpredictable. Sometimes a manager fails. Someone criticizes you at work or your partner pulls away. Suddenly, the exile is triggered, and a massive wave of pain and shame floods the system.
And that's when it gets chaotic.
When that happens, the third group steps in the firefighters.
And firefighters don't care about the long-term consequences. They just want to put out the fire right now.
Precisely. Firefighters are highly reactive protectors. They use impulsive, extreme, and often destructive behaviors to numb the sudden pain immediately. This is binge eating, substance abuse, reckless spending, doom scrolling for 6 hours, or flying into a sudden rage.
They don't care if you lose your job or your relationship.
They don't care about your diet or your budget. Their only job is to extinguish the emotional fire of the exile by any means necessary.
So if we look at self-sabotage through this lens, it changes everything. When you suddenly eat a whole cake after a week of eating perfectly clean, or when you snap at your partner and start a massive argument just when you were feeling incredibly close and vulnerable, you're not broken.
You're functioning exactly as the system was designed.
You don't lack willpower. It's literally just a protective part of you, a firefighter or an overzealous manager trying to keep you safe from perceived vulnerability. It's trying to put out an emotional fire using the only crude tools it was given decades ago. It's actually an act of deep biological self-love, even if the behavior itself is destructive.
That is a beautiful way to frame it. It removes the shame. And the specific tools and strategies these parts use are not random. They are dictated by what clinical frameworks call early maladaptive schemas.
Schemas, so these are the patterns.
Think of schemas as the cognitive blueprints, or the deeply grooved neural shortcuts that develop when your core childhood needs for safety, connection, and autonomy are not met. The research identifies several main domains of these schemas.
Can we walk through what these actually look like in real life? Because when I read this, I felt like the researchers had been reading my mail.
Absolutely. Let's look at the first domain, disconnection and rejection. If a child grows up in an unpredictable or abusive environment, they develop a schema where they fundamentally expect abandonment.
So in adulthood, this is the person who gets a text from their partner saying, we need to talk later. And their brain immediately goes to, they're leaving me, I need to pack my bags, I should break up with them first.
Yes. They preemptively sever the connection to avoid the anticipated pain of being rejected. The second domain is impaired autonomy and performance. This is where an individual believes they are fundamentally incompetent or constantly vulnerable to disaster.
They just feel helpless.
They feel they cannot survive without constant help.
That looks like the incredibly capable adult who calls their mother 5 times a day to ask for advice on basic decisions, or the employee who constantly needs the boss to hold their hand because they are terrified of making a mistake. They have zero trust in their own capability.
What about the third domain? The third domain is impaired limits. This is often the result of an overly permissive childhood or a lack of discipline. We see it manifest as grandiosity, a deep sense of entitlement, or a total lack of self-control.
They just can't handle friction.
They cannot tolerate frustration or being told no.
The classic narcissist profile, or the person who constantly cuts in line and genuinely believes the rules don't apply to them. Then we have the fourth domain, which the source material called other directedness. This one is huge for so many people.
It's very common in our culture.
This is the subjugation and self-sacrifice domain. It's the too nice syndrome. You constantly abandon your own needs, your own preferences, and your own voice to please others because you learned early on that the only way to earn love and avoid anger was to be completely compliant.
Exactly. The other directed person will eat at a restaurant they hate, work weekends without asking for overtime, and suppress their own anger, all to maintain a false sense of harmony.
It's self-abandonment as a survival strategy.
And finally, we have overvigilance and inhibition. This manifests as unrelenting perfectionism and the complete inhibition of spontaneous emotion. You live your life wound up incredibly tight, believing that if you make a single mistake or if you show a single tear, the whole world will collapse.
It sounds exhausting. And the research points out that when you operate from these schemas, you develop a unique relational fingerprint. The clinical term used in the sources is the core conflictual relationship theme. It's like a dance you do in every relationship.
The theme has 3 interacting components: the wish, the responsive other, and the responsive self.
Let's illustrate this so it's super clear for the listener.
Let's say your core wish is the deep fundamental desire to be heard and validated. But your schema based on childhood experience anticipates the responsive other to be dismissal or invalidation.
Because that's what always happened before.
Right. You expect them to roll their eyes or ignore you. Therefore, your habitual responsive self is to either emotionally withdraw before you even speak or to lash out aggressively to force them to listen.
And this leads us to one of the most frustrating aspects of human behavior, which is repetition compulsion. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we subconsciously pursue familiar chaos over unfamiliar stability?
It defies logic until you look at the biology.
Why do we keep dating the exact same toxic, emotionally unavailable person, just wearing different clothes and a different name?
Because to your primitive brain, the chaos of your childhood is predictable. You already have the survival software for it. You know exactly how to walk on eggshells. You know how to placate an angry partner.
But a nice, stable partner is terrifying.
New, healthy, unconditional love feels entirely untested. It feels completely terrifying because your brain doesn't have a script for it. We subconsciously recreate our painful history because our brain is desperately trying to get it right this time.
It's like we're a director trying to reshoot a movie scene from our childhood. We want to rewrite the ending of the play so that the emotionally unavailable parent finally loves us, but we keep casting emotionally unavailable partners and using the exact same broken script.
And we act surprised when the play ends the exact same way.
And then we're shocked when it ends in a breakup again.
What's fascinating here is how this repetition compulsion ties into an even deeper, more systemic issue, which is the burden of invisible loyalties.
Invisible loyalties, that sounds so mysterious.
In systemic psychological frameworks, families operate on a multi-generational ledger of merit and debt. There are profound relational ethics at play that we rarely speak about.
A multi-generational ledger. That sounds heavy. What does that mean in practice?
It means that the suffering and the sacrifices of your parents and grandparents create an unconscious psychological debt. If a parent suffered deeply, perhaps they worked 3 back-breaking jobs to keep the family afloat, a child might develop an overwhelming, invisible sense of guilt for surpassing the parent.
They feel they owe them everything.
We're talking about the conflict between vertical loyalty and horizontal loyalty. Vertical loyalty is your deeply ingrained loyalty to your ancestors, your parents, and your family system. Horizontal loyalty is loyalty to your spouse, your current life, your peers, or your own self-actualization.
And the conflict arises because you can't always serve both.
Precisely. Very often, horizontal loyalty, like building a deeply intimate marriage or achieving massive personal success, is achieved at the painful psychological cost of vertical disloyalty.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
To truly commit to your spouse, you have to subconsciously tell your parents, I am leaving your system to create my own.
Yeah.
To many people, that feels like a betrayal.
You see this all the time, and we usually just call it success guilt. The source material had these incredible anonymous examples that just stopped me in my tracks.
They perfectly illustrate the theory.
Think about a brilliant student who is the very first person in their working-class family to win a prestigious academic scholarship to an Ivy League school. And suddenly, in their second semester, they start failing all their classes. They skip studying, they sleep through exams.
Because succeeding would separate them from their family's identity?
Or think of an adult who builds an incredible multi-million-dollar business and then subconsciously sabotages it by making terrible investments or forgetting to pay their taxes. Why? Because doing significantly better than their struggling parents feels like a fundamental betrayal of the family code.
It violates the relational ethics.
It violates that invisible loyalty contract. They shrink themselves down so they don't leave their family behind in the ledger.
This systemic loyalty is exactly what governs what we call the upper limit thermostat. We all have an internal temperature setting for how much love, how much success, and how much joy we are allowed to experience based on what was modeled for us.
The thermostat analogy is perfect. Explain how this cooling mechanism kicks in.
Imagine your internal thermostat is set to 70 degrees of happiness. If you get a promotion, fall in love, and win the lottery all in 1 week, the temperature in your life suddenly spikes to 95 degrees.
You're on fire.
You're experiencing a heat wave of success. But your subconscious perceives this spike not as a blessing, but as a severe threat to your systemic belonging. It says, we are too far outside the family norm. We are in danger of being exiled.
So it brings the temperature back down.
It triggers an artificial cooling mechanism to bring the temperature back down to 70.
And that cooling mechanism is self-sabotage. You start a massive fight with your partner over how they load the dishwasher. You suddenly develop a mysterious physical illness. You massively procrastinate on a career-defining opportunity. You literally cool your own life down because the joy feels too hot to handle.
Yes, and the research details 4 underlying fears that power this thermostat. First, the fear of feeling fundamentally flawed, the imposter syndrome. That says if you get too high, everyone will finally realize you are a fake and the fall will destroy you.
It's the waiting for the other shoe to drop feeling.
Second, the fear of disloyalty and abandonment, which we just explored with the family ledger. Third, the burden of success. This is the fear that if you succeed now, you will be expected to perform at this impossible level forever and the pressure will crush you.
And the fourth is the crime of surpassing. The visceral guilt of outshining your family or your siblings. And this goes so deep, it actually manifests physically as what the literature calls the anniversary syndrome.
It's truly astonishing how the body tracks time.
When I read the case studies about this, I had to read them twice because it sounded like fiction, but it is documented medical reality.
The anniversary syndrome is one of the most profound examples of cellular memory and invisible loyalty.
There was a case study of a 39-year-old man who developed a severe medical condition but absolutely refused life-saving medical treatment. The doctors couldn't understand his bizarre resistance.
Until they looked at his genealogy.
Right, when they dug into his family history, they discovered that both of his grandfathers had died at exactly age 39. His body and his subconscious were honoring a lethal family timeline.
It's a biological loyalty oath.
Or the other case, a paraplegic individual who had a devastating hang gliding accident at the exact same age his father had experienced a major, life-altering accident.
Those cases perfectly illustrate how the body remembers what the conscious mind attempts to suppress. The individual acts out historical transgenerational trauma as a form of blind love.
Blind love, that's a powerful term.
They are saying, on a subconscious level, I love you so much I will share your exact fate. The body literally keeps the score of the family ledger.
Okay, so if the body keeps the score, what's the referee? What's the biological enforcer, all these invisible rules, these fears, and these loyalties?
The biological enforcer is the Reticular Activating System, or the RAS. It's a bundle of nerves located at the base of your brainstem. The RAS is the ultimate gatekeeper of your reality. At any given second, your brain is bombarded with roughly 11 million bits of sensory data.
11 million bits per second. That is the temperature of the room, hum of the refrigerator, the feeling of your socks in your feet, the light coming through the window. It's way too much data.
Exactly. If your conscious mind had to process 11 million bits of data, it would instantly short-circuit. So the RAS acts as a massive filter. It distills those 11 million bits down to just 40 or 50 bits of information for your conscious mind to actually process and perceive.
And it has to decide what makes the cut.
And here is the critical part. It filters this data based entirely on what you deeply believe is relevant, not what is objectively true in the room.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If your internal record, your schemas, and your loyalties have programmed your RAS to believe that you are fundamentally unlovable, your RAS will literally ignore 49 smiling, welcoming faces in a crowded room just to lock onto the one person scowling in the corner.
It completely deletes the positive signals.
It deletes the 49 smiles from your visual awareness before you even register them. It takes that one scowl, feeds it to your conscious mind, says, see, I told you, nobody likes you, we are not safe here.
It creates a biological self-fulfilling prophecy. This is why people stuck in victim loops truly believe the world is entirely against them. From their biological perspective, it is.
They literally cannot see the good stuff.
They literally cannot see the opportunities for wealth, the gestures of love, or the paths to success because their RAS is actively deleting them from their visual and auditory field.
To change your life, you literally have to program your RAS to see a different reality. And this connects so deeply to how we talk and how we process emotion. Let's talk about the neurological difference between the default mode network, the DMN, and the task positive network, the TPN, because it turns out how we talk about our problems actually rewires our brain.
Yes, this is the difference between healthy venting and toxic complaining,
which people mix up all the time.
When you are engaged in productive problem solving, or when you are venting to a friend with the intention of finding a solution or processing an emotion to move past it, you engage the task positive network. This network is generative. It looks forward, it builds, it resolves.
But complaining is a whole different biological beast.
When you are stuck in toxic complaining, which is ruminative, repetitive, and problem-oriented, you hyperconnect the default mode network.
And what does that network do?
The DMN is active when you are daydreaming or ruminating on the past. When it becomes hyperconnected, you trap yourself in an internal narrative loop. You replay the argument, you rehearse the injury, and you reinforce the neural pathways of being wronged.
And this ties right into victim consciousness, what some leadership frameworks call the to-me state, where you believe life is happening to you rather than by you or for you. The research points out something that completely shifted my perspective. Complaining acts as a mathematical scalar operation.
It multiplies the effect.
It's a multiplier of misery. Just like carbon emissions multiply future climate damage by trapping heat, the emotional emissions of complaining and victimhood multiply your future personal struggles by a factor of 2 or 3.
It's a compounding interest of negativity.
You are literally placing a bulk order with the universe for more pain because you're keeping your DMN hyper-focused on the negative.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of our behavior, this hyper-focus on victimhood often leads to a behavioral adaptation called transactional altruism.
Transactional altruism. That sounds like an oxymoron. How can altruism be a transaction?
It happens when an individual overgives, constantly volunteering, constantly fixing other people's problems, and sacrificing themselves. But they are not doing it out of genuine empathy.
So they have an ulterior motive.
They are doing it as a covert way to buy love, validation, and a sense of moral superiority. They're keeping a secret scorecard. Genuine altruism, helping someone simply to help them, activates the dopamine and oxytocin reward systems in the brain. It feels good and replenishing.
But transactional altruism bypasses those reward systems entirely.
Exactly. Because it is rooted in anxiety and a fear of not being enough, it bypasses the reward centers and leads directly to resentment, deep emotional exhaustion, and a deeply entrenched victim identity.
Like, look at everything I do for everyone and no one appreciates me.
Precisely. That is the anthem of transactional altruism.
Oh. And that chronic resentment, that chronic stress, is not just a bad mood. It's physically destroying us on a cellular level, right? Let's go back to epigenetics for a second. What is this chronic stress doing to our brains?
The epigenetic effect is devastating. Chronic stress bathes the brain in cortisol. Over time, this actually shrinks the hippocampus, which is the brain structure vital for memory, emotional regulation, and spatial context. Furthermore, chronic stress activates molecules called HDACs.
Let's slow down on that term. What are HDACs?
HDACs stands for histone deacetylases. Think of them as molecular brake pads on your DNA.
Brake pads. Okay, I follow.
In order for your brain to learn a new habit or create a new neural pathway for happiness, your DNA needs to be unpacked and read. HDACs wrap the DNA up incredibly tight, suppressing the gene expression necessary for new learning and neuroplasticity.
So it locks the DNA away.
When you are in chronic stress, your trauma is literally stored as intracellular metabolism. The brakes are fully clamped down.
So your cells are physically hitting the brakes on your ability to change. You can read all the self-help books in the world, but if your cells are clamped down by HDACs, the new information can't physically integrate.
The hardware is rejecting the software update.
And man, does this show up in the most practical areas of our lives, our bank accounts and our careers. Let's spend some time on the manifestation of this in career and wealth. Because money is never just about money, is it?
Money is deeply emotional and heavily tied to our earliest survival schemas. The source material outlines 4 primary money scripts that dictate our financial reality: money avoidance, money worship, money status, and money vigilance.
And what's most revealing is how these scripts are deeply tied to our psychological attachment styles.
Yes, whether we are secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized.
Let's break these down. If you have an anxious attachment style, meaning you're terrified of abandonment and constantly hypervigilant, you might lean heavily into money vigilance.
They're always bracing for impact.
This is the person who hoards pennies out of absolute terror. They could have $3 million in the bank, but they will agonize over a $4 cup of coffee because their nervous system tells them they are always on the brink of starvation.
Conversely, if you have an avoidant attachment style, you might practice money avoidance. This individual ignores their debts entirely. They don't open their mail. They don't look at their bank accounts.
They just pretend it's not happening.
Subconsciously, relying on money feels like relying on a person, which their childhood taught them was deeply unsafe. So they try to pretend money doesn't exist.
Then you have money status, which is trying to buy self-worth. Buying a luxury car on credit because you need the external world to validate your existence. And money worship, believing that a certain dollar amount will magically cure all your childhood trauma. All of these scripts create what is known as the scarcity mindset.
And we must understand that scarcity isn't just a lack of funds in a checking account. It is a profound cognitive bandwidth tax.
A bandwidth tax, that's a great way to put it.
When you operate from a scarcity mindset, it floods the body with cortisol. This physiological state forces the brain to make short-term, reactive survival decisions at the severe expense of long-term strategic planning.
You can't plan a 10-year investment strategy when your brain thinks a tiger is chasing you right now.
Exactly. So to actually manifest wealth and shift this financial paradigm, an individual must transition from a state of wanting, which is fundamentally a frequency of lack, saying I don't have this, to a state of deserving, which is a frequency of possession and inherent worthiness. You have to believe you are allowed to hold the wealth.
And this extends beyond wealth into how we choose our life's work. We see the wounded healer phenomenon constantly in vocational choices.
Yes, the wounded healer is a very specific professional manifestation.
People choose vocational paths like teaching, nursing, social work, or counseling as a subconscious attempt to rectify the imbalances of their own childhoods. They're trying to save the neglected kids they once were, or heal the broken parents they couldn't fix when they were young. They pour their entire soul into their work.
While this dynamic fosters incredible deep empathy and creates some of our most dedicated frontline workers, it comes with a severe clinical warning.
It's a double-edged sword.
Without conscious processing, intense self-awareness, and rigid boundary setting, the wounded healer risks profound burnout.
Because they're constantly immersing themselves in environments that re-trigger their own unhealed trauma. If the internal ledger is not balanced, the act of healing others becomes another form of self-depletion. They give away the very energy they need to heal themselves.
Precisely. Okay, so we've mapped the architecture. We know the invisible blueprints, the schemas, the multi-generational loyalties, the brain structures like the RAS and DMN, and how all of this keeps us stuck.
Which is a lot to take in.
Now we must pivot to the most important part of this entire discussion, crossing the bridge. How do we systematically rewire this ancient system?
This is where the rubber meets the road. It starts with stepping into the power dynamics matrix. The goal is to move from being the victim of politics, where you have very low power over your life and very low awareness of your patterns, to becoming the strategist, where you have high power and high awareness.
But to do this, to make that transition, you have to cross what the researchers call a cognitively dissonant gulf.
And crossing that gulf is incredibly painful for the ego.
It is brutal. You have to violently set aside your pride and admit the massive gap between the heroic, victimized story you tell about yourself, like, I'm just unlucky in love, or my boss is out to get me, and the actual reality of your own self-sabotaging actions.
You have to look in the mirror and say, I am the common denominator in all my failed relationships. I am the one choosing the chaos.
Crossing that existential bridge requires philosophy just as much as it requires biology. It requires the profound courage to face what existentialists call the three fundamental anxieties of human existence.
Let's lay those out.
You must face the anxiety of fate and death, realizing your time is finite. You must face the anxiety of guilt and condemnation, owning your mistakes. And you must face the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness, recognizing that you have to create your own purpose. You must confront the void.
But the beautiful part of the research is that the goal here is not to artificially build a shiny new personality. You don't have to become someone else. The goal is to shed the garbage emotions, the inherited fears, the ancestral resentments, the masks of the managers and firefighters.
It's an unburdening process.
It's like peeling a deeply calcified onion. When you peel all that away, you reveal what we call the internal sage. This is your inherent, optimized biological wisdom. You already have it inside you.
Biologically speaking, it is about shifting cellular states. A cell cannot be in a state of growth and a state of protection simultaneously. It's a biological impossibility.
So it's one or the other.
If a cell is in protection mode, the membrane hardens. It stops taking in nutrients, and it walls itself off from the environment. To grow, the cell must become permeable. It must open up. You have to actively signal safety to your nervous system to allow that protective armor to drop, so the internal sage can flourish and growth can occur.
So let's get into the highly tactical interventions for this biological reprogramming. We promise the listener actionable takeaways, and the source material delivers heavily here. The first major tool is somatic handwriting. Now, we all live on our phones and laptops. Why can't we just type our new goals or our journal entries into a notes app? Why handwriting?
Because handwriting is neurobiologically non-negotiable for this level of deep rewiring. When you type, it's a very simple repetitive motor action. But writing by hand engages a complex motor sensory loop. It requires fine motor skills, spatial awareness, and sustained focus.
So what happens in the brain when the pen hits the paper?
When you physically write out a new belief, or perhaps a letter releasing an old family loyalty, your motor cortex has to work incredibly hard. As it guides your hand, it sends a signal called a corollary discharge to your sensory cortex.
Corollary discharge, what does that do?
This corollary discharge tags the new thought as a self-generated physical reality in real time. It tells the brain, this isn't just a fleeting thought. We are physically manifesting this into the material world.
And doing this completely bypasses the prefrontal cortex, right? The prefrontal cortex acts as the brain's PR firm that usually filters out changes to protect the ego. Handwriting brings the subconscious data out of the limbic system, forces it through the motor system, and externalizes it on the page, making it manageable and real. That is incredible.
It's a physical bridge between the mind and reality.
Tool number 2 is the interrupt question. This is for when you're caught in one of those DMN ruminating loops.
Yes, when you catch yourself spiraling into victimhood or anxiety, You must ask a specific question. What can I do for a better future right now? But the key is, you must ask it aloud.
Why out loud? Why can't I just think it?
Because thinking it just keeps it trapped in the same spinning neural loop. Speaking it aloud forces crosstalk between your motor cortex, which generates the speech, and your auditory cortex, which hears your own voice.
It snaps you out of it.
This physical crosstalk acts like a hard reboot for your nervous system. It boots up your executive software to manually override the default mode network. It pulls you forcefully back into the present moment.
What can I do for a better future right now? It shifts you from to me victimhood to buy me strategy immediately. Okay, tool number 3 is a crucial clinical framework called the downward arrow technique. This helps uncover the core blueprints or schemas driving your outsized reactions. Let's simulate this so the listener can hear exactly how it works.
Let's do that. Imagine you're sitting at a restaurant. You are upset because a friend is 15 minutes late for lunch. Your heart is racing. You are angry. The surface thought is simply, my friend is late.
Okay.
In the downward arrow technique, you take that surface thought and you ask a specific probe. If that is true, what does that mean to me?
Okay, so I ask myself that. If my friend is late, what does that mean? I might answer, it means she doesn't respect my time. She thinks her time is more valuable.
Then you apply the arrow again. If she doesn't respect your time, what does that deeply mean about you?
It means I'm not respected in this friendship. It means I'm an afterthought.
And we push it one layer deeper. If you are an afterthought and you are not respected, what does that ultimately mean?
It means I'm fundamentally flawed. It means I'm ultimately unlovable and I will always be abandoned.
Wow. See how fast we got there?
Through this downward arrow inquiry, you trace a minor daily annoyance, a friend hitting traffic directly down to a core maladaptive schema of disconnection and rejection. You realize you aren't mad about the 15 minutes. You are terrified of being unlovable.
Exactly. It reveals the true software running the reaction. Once you find that underlying schema, how do you change it? This brings us to visualization.
We've all heard the pop psychology advice to visualize the finish line. See yourself holding the big check or the gold medal.
But research comparing this to elite international athletic teams shows a very different, much more effective approach.
Right. You shouldn't just visualize the gold medal. That doesn't prepare your nervous system for the actual friction of reality. You need what the researchers call process-oriented visualization.
You have to picture the work.
Think about an elite marathon runner. They don't just visualize crossing the tape. They visualize the grueling daily process. You visualize yourself hitting the snooze button at 5 a.m., feeling the exhaustion, and then choosing to pull the covers off anyway. You visualize your partner saying something incredibly triggering, feeling the heat rise in your chest, and then visualizing yourself taking a deep breath and responding calmly instead of yelling.
Visualizing the process of handling triggers, rather than just the utopian outcome, dramatically lowers your biological resistance to change. Your brain rehearses the micro-decisions of resilience.
And when dealing with the heavy ghosts of the past, the deeply entrenched family traumas, the source material introduces virtual visualization and exoneration. And there's a strong warning attached to this one.
Yes, a very strong clinical warning. We often think we need to confront our abusers or our neglectful caregivers in the real world to get closure.
To finally have it out with them.
But real-world confrontation often leads to severe re-traumatization. Because the person who hurt you is likely still operating from their own unhealed schemas, they cannot give you the apology or the closure you need. They will likely deny it or attack you.
So what do we do instead?
You use virtual internal confrontation. In a safe, meditative state, you visualize them. You say everything you needed to say to them in your mind. You express the anger and the grief. And then eventually you practice exoneration.
And we should clarify, exoneration is not excusing the abuse. It is not saying what they did was okay.
Not at all. Exoneration is recognizing that the parent's failure was an inherited systemic burden. They simply didn't have the tools to break. They were running their own faulty software.
You're just acknowledging the reality of their limitations.
By visualizing this, you balance the internal ledger ethically. You forgive the debt so that you no longer have to carry it. This closes the traumatic loop in your limbic system safely, without requiring anything from the external person.
That is deeply liberating. Now, let's talk about the timeline for all this rewiring. Because we are an impatient culture, we've all heard that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Is that true?
It is actually a widespread myth that needs clarifying. Comprehensive neurological studies show that true habit formation, where the behavior shifts fully from the conscious prefrontal cortex to the automatic basal ganglia, takes an average of 66 days. And depending on the complexity of the habit, it can take up to 254 days.
So where did the 21 days come from?
The 21-day mark is still critical, but not for habit formation. 21 days is the threshold for cellular habituation. Remember those epigenetic changes we discussed?
With the cortisol and the HDACs?
Yes. It takes roughly 3 weeks of consistent daily practice to break your body's cellular addiction to old stress hormones, like cortisol and adrenaline. Your cells are literally withdrawing from the chemistry of your old trauma.
And this is exactly why you have to watch out for the day 4 or 5 resistance spike. This part of the research made so much sense of my own past failures. Around day 4 or 5 of a new routine, whether it's a new diet, a new meditation practice, or a new way of communicating with your spouse, you will hit a massive wall.
The physical symptoms can be intense.
You'll feel physically exhausted, irritable, you might get a headache, and your brain will actively convince you that this new path is stupid and you should just quit.
That is not a sign that the new habit is wrong or that you lack discipline. That is the limbic hijack fighting back. Your ego, your managers, and your firefighters are fighting for their lives to preserve the old identity. They are experiencing the withdrawal of the familiar chaos.
You have to intellectually anticipate that spike, push through the physical discomfort to reach the 21-day cellular threshold, and then keep going to the 66-day neurological habituation.
To help push through those intense spikes of resistance, the source material offers a brilliant, rapid-fire tool called the DICCC framework: direct, instruct, command, compel, and code.
It sounds militaristic.
Because vague, flowery affirmations do not work on the primitive brain in moments of crisis. You cannot just politely ask your amygdala to calm down. You must use specific, authoritative, present tense commands.
And you pair these intense commands with a physical pattern interruption, right?
Exactly. For example, if you feel a panic loop or a victim narrative starting to run, you don't just think happy thoughts. You physically snap your fingers loudly or clap your hands, and you say the word reset aloud.
A physical jolt.
This somatic physical interruption creates a split-second gap, a scatter, in the neural loop. It knocks the needle off the record for just a microsecond.
And in that microsecond of silence, you insert your new code. I am safe. I am making a new choice. You command the nervous system.
You direct the mind with precision. You give the builder a new blueprint in real time.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered so much ground today, from 500 hertz radio signals in your brain, to the legacy of your ancestors, to snapping your fingers to reset your neural pathways. What is the ultimate takeaway?
It's about sovereign control.
It means that you are not broken, you're not weak, you're not lazy, and you're not fundamentally flawed. You're simply a beautifully complex biological machine executing a brilliant, albeit massively outdated survival code that you wrote when you were just a child trying to figure out how to be safe in a scary world.
A code that kept you alive.
But you're an adult now. By moving from being a passive executor of inherited scripts to an active, conscious architect of a deliberate reality, you regain total sovereignty over your own biology. You can literally rewrite the story of your life cell by cell.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, healing isn't just an individual pursuit. It isn't just about making your own life more comfortable. It is about stopping the transgenerational transmission of trauma.
That is the real work.
When you do this rigorous, often painful work of rewiring your biology and crossing that cognitively dissonant gulf, you are balancing the ledger for your ancestors. You are paying off a debt that goes back generations, and simultaneously you are reprogramming the baseline software for the next generation. You become the endpoint of the inherited suffering. The buck stops with your biology.
That gives me chills. I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about everything we discussed. If your deepest struggles, your impenetrable financial ceilings, and your repetitive relationship disasters were actually just unconscious biological loyalties to the ghosts of the past. Wait, strike that. If they are just loyalties to the ghosts of the past, once you finally do the work to strip all of those loyalties away, who are you, really? In the beautiful empty space that's left behind, you get to decide. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Now go out there, shed that old code, and step fully into your own zone of genius.